Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
So we've hit a milestone. This is show 30.
2017?
Yeah, what?
We're halfway through 2017?
Well, there's also that, but we've been doing this for 30 weeks. So we're more than halfway through a year of shows. So that's not bad.
Yeah. People still seem to like it, so.
Yeah. I haven't got any death threats yet. Don't start. No, please. Anyway.
Well, we may get some after tonight's show. You never know. Possibly.
I doubt it. We're harmless.
I don't think the heavy duty Tesla fans really listen to us anyway.
No, probably not. So that's what's coming up. But first, let's talk about what we're driving. And since it's an EV heavy show, I mean, why don't you start us off?
All right. So I spent the last week with the Chevy Bolt, which is GM's new long range, more or less affordable electric vehicle. Bolt went on sale in California and Oregon last December, and it's been gradually spreading across the country, and it's now available nationwide in all 50 states. And it's the first car with a 200-mile electric driving range and a net price of just under $30,000. So that means that the base price on the Bolt is $37,499 or something. So with the $7,500 federal tax credit, it comes just shy of $30,000. And that's for the base model, and then the loaded Premier model, which is what I drove, goes for like 41. So that's still about 32,000 after the federal tax credits. And depending on where you live, what state you live in, you might be eligible for some additional state and local incentives as well. Like in California, I think you can get another $5,000 off of that, and various incentives across the country. But anyway, you can look that up if you're interested in the Bolt. But the car itself, and I think we talked about this a little bit in January after I went on the Media Drive program in California. I'm really impressed with this car. I mean, it is a really good car. And having spent a week with it now, I'm even more impressed than I was after I drove it in California. One of the things that I wanted to do, well, first of all, let me talk a little bit more about the car. GM has taken a very different approach with the design of this car compared to what Tesla is doing with the Model 3 that's supposedly going into production at the end of, actually be tomorrow as we're recording this.
Yeah. I mean, so I told somebody recently this week, we were talking about this, and I was like, EVs it was actually because of the Volvo announcement, which we'll talk about later as well. But, EVs are definitely coming, and Tesla, while they have done innovation very well, I suggested that he check out the Bolt because it's a real car made by a real automaker, which means, they're good at bending the metal and putting it together and having it stay together and doing that in a consistent fashion.
That can provide support.
Right. So, yeah, the Bolt kind of looks like a high top sneaker. It's definitely not as pretty as any Tesla, although the Model X is not really all that pretty anyway. But
yeah, I mean, the Model 3 is a reasonably sleek looking sedan. But the problem is in this market, it's a sedan, and sedan sales, car sales in general, have been tanking for the past year and a half. Midsize and compact sedans are down about 10% or more this year compared to 2016. And where the market is all running to is crossovers, and we'll get a little more into that later on as well with the story about Kia and Hyundai. But so GM is opted to make the Bolt a more upright hatchback sedan or hatchback, and they're actually marketing it as a crossover. They actually list it as part of the Chevrolet crossover family, along with the Trax and the Equinox and the Traverse. Yeah, calling it a crossover is a stretch, but granted, it does have the higher hip point, the higher seating position that you typically get in a crossover. And it's actually really comfortable to ride in. One of the complaints that I've heard from some people is the fact that the interior is all hard plastics, and yes, it is. But one of GM's goals in designing this car, in addition to keeping the cost down, was also to try to keep the weight down. The Bolt only weighs about I think a little over 3,500 pounds. I think it's like 3,550, which, for a car, where 1,000 pounds of the mass is the battery pack. That's actually pretty impressive. And we don't know yet how much the Model 3 is going to weigh, but for comparison purposes, a Model S weighs somewhere, depending on which battery pack size you get, anywhere from 46 to 4,800 pounds. So it's well over 1,000 pounds more. And, it doesn't really offer, at least in the 75 kilowatt hour version, you don't get any more range out of that. And in fact, you actually have more passenger volume in the Bolt than you do in the Model S, which is a substantially larger car, because it's packaged better. So
right. So the Bolt is smaller, but much more space efficient because it has that. I don't know that I'd call it a crossover, an SUV though. To me, it's like a hatch.
Yeah, it's a tall hatch. Like I said, for GM's marketing purposes, they're calling it a crossover, but it's a tall hatch. Think of it more along the lines of a Honda Fit, a little bit bigger than a Honda Fit. But it's really roomy inside. 5 adults sitting in there, as long as the 3 in the back seat aren't too broad shouldered, is not a problem at all. There's plenty of leg room, plenty of headroom, and even decent shoulder room, for 3 across in the back seat. So, this is a very impressive car. And, getting back to the hard plastic surfaces inside, in the cabin, yes, they're hard plastics, but GM has done some really nice stuff with the texturing on there. And so, you touch it, it's clearly hard surfaces, not soft touch materials, but it looks good. It doesn't look cheap, which is important.
Yeah. And, they're not the only car out there with hard plastics. Look at the door panels of even a Mustang. There's hard plastic in other cars.
Yeah, there are lots of cars with hard plastics, and the key is in making it so it doesn't look cheap like a lot of cars of the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah, so
I think GM's done an admirable job here with that. And it's a fun car to drive. It's got 200 horsepower from the electric motor and 268, I think, foot-pounds of torque, which comes from 0 RPM. So this thing can run 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds.
Yeah, that doesn't suck.
No, not at all. That's plenty. It's if the Model 3 is in base form is faster at all, it won't be by much than this. It's not going to be much more than do much better than about 6 seconds 0 to 60 from what we've heard. So you've got lots of room for passengers inside this thing, lots of room for cargo. There's, I think, 17 cubic feet of cargo space behind the rear seat. And then if you fold the back seats down, it's a 60-40 folding rear seat, as is typical. You've got, tons more room in there, to put all kinds of gear. We went out to the lake this weekend, and packed in all kinds of stuff in there. So there's plenty of room, for your active lifestyle in this thing.
Did you have any, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what was your question?
Did you experience any range anxiety with it? The last time I had...
That's what I was just going to get into.
Okay, because the last time I had an electric vehicle, and it was a Leaf, but I had it out on the highway, and the range just dropped really, really quick to the point where I actually got off onto back roads so that I could do some more regen, so that I didn't feel like I was going to make it round trip if I just stuck to the highway.
That is absolutely not a problem with the Bolt. The official EPA rating for the range is 238 miles. And one of the interesting things that they've done with this, because of the rules for doing the certification tests, they have to run it in drive mode with the transmission in drive. And so in drive, the car is calibrated to give you regen braking when you lift off the accelerator. That's similar to what you get from engine braking in a conventional internal combustion car. So you get, mild deceleration, without hitting the brakes. And then, a little bit of creeping when you lift off from a stop. When you put the shifter in low mode, that's when things get interesting. So I ran this car through a 40-mile test loop around Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor area where I live, which was a combination of urban, suburban, and a bit of highway driving as well. And I did it one day, starting with a full charge, and did it in drive, and then I did it in low, and that, basically the same conditions, same time of day for both runs. And what I found was that in drive, I averaged about 4.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which is really good efficiency for an EV. But then when I put it in low mode, low gives you much stronger regenerative braking. So basically that allows you to do one pedal driving. So except for panic brake stops, you'll never really have to use the brake pedal. You can just, modulate the accelerator to slow down and speed up, much like with the BMW i3 is very similar. So you can basically drive it without ever touching the brake. And in fact, I think, over the 40-mile test loop, around Ypsi and Ann Arbor, I hit the brake pedal maybe 3 times.
That's such a pleasing way to drive too. Like, it sounds weird until you do it.
Yeah, and when you get used to it, it's actually really good, especially in traffic. It's great because you're not constantly moving your foot back and forth between the brake and the accelerator. You just, modulate one pedal, and it's very relaxing.
Yeah, and one of the things I dislike about all automatics is the creep. So
yeah,
when you put it in that high regen mode, it creeps a lot less, if like none at all. It's just much more pleasant.
Right. So, and that mode will actually bring the car to a complete stop. So even, when you're coming up to an intersection, you just lift off and coast down, and the car will come to a stop even without hitting the brake pedal, and it'll sit there at the intersection without going anywhere.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. So in drive, I got 4.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which with a 60 kilowatt hour pack comes out to 282 mile range. When I drove it in low mode, I got 5.6 miles per kilowatt hour, which comes out to 333 miles of range.
Which
I wasn't hypermiling this thing. I was just driving it normally.
Yeah. I mean, and so like, that doesn't mean that they're underrating the range. It probably means they have some headroom. And if you were to drive a more varied route or a different route, like the number would change a bit, but that's a really good test to show sort of the variance between already good efficiency and even better in the low mode. I wish that they would get us to the point where they can switch the modes around. So
I mean, I'd love to have them do the heavy regen as the default mode, and that's what BMW actually does on the i3. But I think they're still trying to appeal to consumers that aren't used to EVs. So they're trying to make it feel as normal as possible.
Well, I mean, just tear the Band-Aid off. Just, you know what? There's nothing's going to get us used to it like just complete immersion.
No, you're absolutely right. So, if you're at all interested in an EV, and you're looking for a new car and you don't feel like waiting who knows how long for a Model 3, and if like most Americans, you're actually not really interested in a car, but you'd rather have something like a crossover with a big opening in the back to put all your stuff from the estate sales that you hit on the weekends, or from IKEA or whatever else, or your bikes or your mountain bikes and all, paddle boards and whatever. You can handle all that stuff with a Bolt. I mean, I think it's actually a better fit for the typical modern American driving lifestyle than the Model 3 is. But granted, I haven't driven the Model 3.
Yeah, nobody has.
But this one big advantage this does have is it does have support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which you won't get in a Tesla.
So this is where I find I have to explain to a lot of folks when this comes up, because Tesla has a really well cultivated image, and
That's the key there. It's well cultivated image.
Yeah, they have a good brand. They do actually, do innovative stuff, and they stretch, and sometimes they miss their goals. What I wish that they did a little better, or without, with a little bit more humility, was actually focus on the core, like car building. Have you ever, and we can get into this shortly, but have you ever sort of like looked at panel gaps on a Tesla, for instance?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
frankly, the fit and finish and quality on Teslas is not up to par with their contemporary competitors.
Yeah. That's what kind of leaves me a little bit like, I'm not that terribly impressed with that for that price. And I understand that Chevrolet and General Motors, there's a lot of baggage that goes along with both of those brands. But, from what I've seen coming out of them, lately, even for the last 10 years, has been really consistent quality. They know how to bolt the stuff together. They know how to form steel and do the consistent panel gaps and the good paint quality. And going through the bankruptcy was good for them in that sense. They did step it up, and it really does show when you put it next to a car that's just feels more like sort of crafted, but not in a that's not a complimentary way. Just it feels sort of like handmade,
Yeah, each one handcrafted to unique specifications
by mistake. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I have tremendous respect for what Tesla has accomplished. I mean, if it were not for Tesla, cars like the Bolt and the Leaf, which, and the second generation Leaf, they announced since we last talked that that's going to debut in September. So that's coming as well as all these other automakers that are going electric. That would not have been happening at the pace it is now were it not for Tesla. So they deserve absolute credit for that. I mean, they've accomplished a lot, but the reality is the cars they're building, really in many respects are just not up to snuff, with modern customer expectations, and the cars they've been selling so far have, it's been early adopters that, want to support the vision of Tesla that have largely been buying those. And, now comes the real test once they actually start shipping the Model 3, whether they can meet the needs of the average consumer. And we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. And we'll come back to Tesla on this show, but, so I finished up my week with the Mazda CX-9, and we actually had a question about it, this week. And one of the questions, and one of the questions was something that I actually noticed, and I guess it's consistent with them, is the air conditioner is really weak. And that's sort of one of the, I noticed kind of two demerits with it. And that weak AC performance was the biggest demerit, because over the 4th of July holiday, we used it here. We had, kids and the dog, and it's a great family car. It's comfortable. This was the signature, so it had the Napa leather, and it was, very nicely done inside. And the 3 rows of seats is great, and it's just overall, it's well thought out. It does drive nicely. But operating the seats, they feel, I don't know, they feel like not flimsy, but almost like gritty. It's hard to, it doesn't instill confidence that it's going to hold up. And that's maybe just my prejudice there, that I was expecting it to just operate maybe like stuff does in a Honda. where it's also, the little things have all been considered, and you pull like one lever and it works smoothly, and it doesn't feel like you've got to, almost break it. And it was really the third row that felt a little bit like I had to manhandle it more than I should have to make it fold down. So,
well, that's actually a pretty common issue in most of the, I hesitate to use the word smaller, but like not like the really big 3-row utilities. Most of the closer to mid-size 3-row utilities, like the things like the Kia Sorento and the Hyundai Santa Fe and the CX-9, they're on the smaller end of the 3-row segment, and most of them are you do have to kind of mess around to try and get the third row seats folded. Yeah,
and I feel really picky pointing that out, but the AC performance was a killer. Just we had it, out and around, and it was in the 80s here. It wasn't really all that humid, and it could not deal with it.
That's too bad.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. I know it has a pretty large interior, for it's got the 2.5 liter engine with the turbo on it. So it's something about
a driver that tends to generate a lot of hot air. So
yeah. I had the kids. They were the ones doing all the talking. No, but that really surprised me. I was like, what is up with this? I thought maybe it was the particular one that I had, but it turns out that I've heard, that complaint is more consistent. So that's something they'll have to look at. And it's probably, some adjustments and some running changes they can make to tweak that. But if you live in a place where solid air conditioning performance is important, that's going to be an issue, especially when you load it up with people. Like you get a hot car on a hot day, it's been sitting in the parking lot in the sun, and everybody wants to pile in after a soccer. And
do you have a big panoramic sunroof too?
It did have a sunroof. Yeah, it was probably because it's a signature, so it was the largest, the nicest sunroof they offer, which doesn't help either with solar loading. But yeah, most cars do okay with the AC. Like even the Mitsubishi Mirage, the AC works okay. So it's just kind of like
what it's worth on the seats. The seats in my 27-year-old Mazda are holding up just fine.
There you go. And you have plenty of air conditioning. You just put the top down.
Exactly.
Lots of headroom too. But the CX-9 is definitely worth a look because it does ride and handle and just drive really, really nicely. Like everything was meant to operate together.
What about the other question had about the stitching? I guess did you, Teamer asked about the stitch work on the CX-9. I heard the Napa leather is high quality, but it's poorly stitched together for some reason. Did you notice any issues with that?
I didn't really notice anything with that. I have to admit, I don't examine the seat stitching all that closely on a regular basis when we get press cars. But it didn't appear like there was any sort of like large seams or anything. So I'd be interested to know more specifically sort of what that complaint is about. Because everything there, like this, the seats were nicely trimmed. They had, contrasting colors on them and maybe it's the lower trim seats because only the signature, I believe, comes with the Napa leather. So that was one thing that I kind of wished I had gotten something less than signature, maybe even like touring or one of the lower trims, just to see what it's like. Cause it's really pretty in signature trim. It has rosewood and the really nice leather and all the best of everything. The head up display, and it's nice. It's one of those things like if you wanted an X5, but you didn't really want to spend the money, you can get most of what an X5 does for $45,000.
Yeah.
It's not bad, so it's competitive, and it's nice to see that Mazda can really breathe some life into that segment because the last CX-9 was sort of clunky on its feet. It was good, but it was a 3-row Ford Edge. So,
right.
Yeah, I hope they fix the AC. The engine could use a little bit, a little bit more oomph. it's not that it ran out of breath or anything. It was just like one of those like, I'm flooring it now. Okay. And that's it. And it's, numbers wise, it's decent. It's like 310 pound-feet of torque and, 2.5 liters. It never really felt flat footed or anything. It was just like, oh, that's all we've got. Okay. I'll be patient. And it's certainly not slow. It just, I think we're spoiled. I think I'm spoiled.
Yeah. Well, that's a given, I think, especially in this business.
Yeah.
You mentioned, that it'd be interesting to try out some of the lesser trim levels. And that's, that is one of the issues, when we're driving these press loaners all the time is the car makers do tend to focus on, getting the higher trim levels into the media's hands, because they want them to check out all the different features, and put the best foot forward with the cars. But, that's not necessarily, I mean, although it's a reasonably high percentage of the vehicles that they sell, it's not the highest share. I mean, that, typically, for most vehicles these days, you typically have, more or less 3 different trim levels. You have your basic trims, the mid-level trims, and then, some premium trims. And the basic ones usually account for about 10% of sales. And the mid-level trims, usually are somewhere around, 50 to 65% of all sales. And then the premium trims, are somewhere around 20 to 30% of sales. So, it's a good percentage of it, but it's not the majority of sales. It's the mid-level ones that it'd be nice to be able to check those out more often and see, what they're like to live with.
Yeah. It can really color your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this year, each of us got a chance to drive the Honda Civic hatchback Sport, which is actually, the Sport. It's the Sport, but it's based on the base trim level of the Civic. So it doesn't have the upgraded display audio system and, a lot of the other features that you get if you go up to an EX or a Touring. So it's actually pretty close to a base trim level. So, it was interesting to experience that and see what it's like, for somebody, that's coming in closer to the entry price point for one of these vehicles.
Yeah. Well, and, it's an interesting play when they do it too. When it tells you a lot about, I think, how confident an automaker is in what it's offering and the story they want to tell and sort of where they understand their buyers are, and that's, I say that because this week I have a Subaru Impreza and I don't have much to say about it yet. We'll talk about it again next week. But it's a 2.5i premium. It's not fully loaded. It's got some features on it, but it's really interesting to me that they'd put that in the fleet because it's like, oh, you don't want to, I mean, I'm sure there's some around with the leather and stuff like that, but this is a sort of like that mid-level car, like you said. It gives you a different perspective on it because it's this is how regular people live. I've got that the William Shatner, Ben Folds thing going in my head. Like, I want to live like regular people or like normal people, like, and that's what I think of when I drive this car. And it gives you a different impression than something like if it were like a WRX or,
right.
Just the limited trim, whatever Subaru's highest trim is, which would have been easy for them to dump in the fleet and make all their press cars like that. And they would be a lot more charming in that way. Cause when you get in a nice car, you go, oh, this is nice. And then, if you're driving it for a week and you're not paying for it, it warps your perception of the sticker price too. When you go, oh, it's $32. That's not too bad.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay, but this is $24.
And that's what the car makers want people to think about. And say, hey, this is actually a really nice car for this price point. And actually, to give credit to Mazda, they have had mid-level and base models of some of their vehicles here in the Detroit fleet at various times. Like, I've had, the Mazda 3 with the base 2-liter engine. I think it's the Touring trim, or maybe it's just a 3i, closer to the base trim level. And, even, with current, particularly with Mazda, with their current lineup, they do a really nice job of trimming out the interiors, even on the base trim levels. They don't look cut rate compared to the premium trim levels. They still have really nice materials and fit and finish, even on the most affordable models.
Yeah, and those are the things that buyers care about. Those are the things that I wind up getting asked about. And, if I've only been in the premium ones, I'm going to say, oh, it's a nice car when it's fully loaded. I have no idea what a base model's like. I don't know how much they take out. So I don't want to belabor the point. So we should get onto the news. But we've had some more basic cars, and just keep, just keep sending us the cars. Just send us the cars. We'll talk about them. Everybody's happy,
and we'll tell you what we think, whether we like them or not.
They'll stop sending cars.
No, I think as long as we can back up our opinions, and if we're honest about the things that we like and the things that we don't like, and we can provide a rationale for why we didn't like it, they're fine with that.
Yeah, well, so it's
I've let's put it this way. I've done lots of negative reviews of cars over the years, and it hasn't stopped anybody. Because I always try to be honest about what I think and why I think. And I mean, frankly, there's in modern cars, there's very few really bad cars anymore, and we've talked about this before,
right?
But when there are things that are annoying, I point them out, because people should know about that. If they're considering that car, they should be aware that this is something that might be an annoyance to them. And if it's not something that they're concerned about, then they can go past it and take into account the good features that they like.
Yeah. Well, and that's the shopping process. It's nice to hear from somebody who has a bit more perspective. And that's one of the things that we get as we get experience with so many different cars on a regular basis, is you get a little bit more exposure than if you're just like shopping, taking a marathon weekend and torturing yourself.
Right.
But it's an interesting sort of user experience approach. And I do this when we're designing, websites and things like that, is you have to put yourself in the user's shoes and say, okay, so when a person comes to this website, they do these things, they're presented with this palette of choices, or do we want to present them with fewer choices and really, control the outcomes, which, that whole discipline transfers very nicely to the human machine interface of automobiles. And I know that this is stuff that the automakers are studying and constantly refining. But that's sort of, what I like to think about when I'm driving these cars. Is like, well, what is the average driver going to do? What is the average person going to appreciate or not appreciate? And I find that I disagree sometimes. Like a lot of the safety stuff that's really proliferated with, the lane of departure warnings and avoidance and collision, forward braking and all that stuff. I think consumers really appreciate that, and I get aggravated by it.
Well, they appreciate some of it, and some of it they are less appreciative of. And a lot of it depends on the implementation. You mentioned the HMI, and the way that car makers give the feedback, give feedback to the drivers. Particularly with lane keeping systems, is something that is somewhat controversial, and everybody's trying to figure out what is the right solution to that. And I think GM actually has a very unique solution that I think actually works, is one of my favorite. In that, at least on some of their higher end cars, when the system detects that you're drifting out of the lane, it will actually vibrate the seat. It'll give you haptic feedback through the seat cushion, and so if you're drifting off to the left, you'll feel a vibration in your left thigh. And if you're drifting off to the right, it'll be in your right thigh. And then if it's actually detecting a potential collision, it actually vibrates the whole seat. So I think it's a very, it's a good way to give an alert that you'll notice, but that isn't annoying like some of the audible alerts that you get in a lot of cars, the beeping when you're starting to drift out of the lane, or, if you're just going around a curve and, maybe clipping the apex a little bit too tight. Those, the constant beeping you get from those, that's a real annoyance. And so car makers are still trying to work out what are the best solutions for that. And this is something that as we transition into more highly automated cars of the future is going to be an ongoing issue. Everybody's trying to figure out what are the best HMI solutions for all of this.
Yeah. The Mazda had a really nice solution for that too. It actually, you could turn on and off the beeping, and it had a vibration that you could also adjust, or that was sort of low or more vigorous through the steering wheel. So, like, they're figuring that kind of stuff out, and so that the drivers understand what it's warning you about, and it's just not the car beeping and blinking at you in disorienting fashion. So they're getting there. And while we're on the subject of safe cars, we should pivot to our topic, or one of our topics, in a superbly well-timed bit of PR release. Volvo has said that they are going to embrace electrification after 2019 fully, which, contrary to what you may have heard, does not mean that every Volvo after 2019 will be an EV. What it means is that it will...
Wait. You mean when they put out a press release with the headline, Volvo cars to go all electric, that doesn't actually mean that they're going all electric?
Well, I mean, the headline is a nice bit of headline writing. I made sure to read the press release before I wrote my take on it for Forbes, which was like, wait. First of all, they've got cars in the pipeline that are going to come out between now and 2019, and they're going to be what they are. They're already planned. They're too far in the development cycle to make any big changes. So they're going to, there are going to be some gas engine stuff out there, at least in the interim. The next step is that you're going to see them, because they're saying go electrification, not all EV, right? So they're all going to have some kind of electric assist. You're going to see light hybrids or mild hybrids, with a belt alternator starter setup and a larger but not very large battery to sort of give you a little bit of oomph. And those are going to replace diesels, from what I understand. The twin engine stuff is going to stick around, and then sort of the ultimate end game is full electrification. And it appears that their scalable product architecture and compact modular architecture, the two platforms that Volvo has, have both been designed to accommodate full electrification with different size battery packs, and also being a scalable platform so that they can be SUVs or wagons or sedans and hatchbacks and stuff. So it's going to take a while. I really don't think you're going to see the death of the gasoline engine in Volvos anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be gas engines in Volvos for many, many years to come. And, they've said that by 2021, they're going to have 5 battery electric models, 3 under the Volvo brand, and then 2 more under the Polestar brand, which is, their performance brand, which is now going to be electrified performance brand. And then in addition to that, all our other cars are going to have at least mild hybridization. So between 19 and 21, they'll convert everything over. So it at least has at a minimum a 48 volt mild hybrid system, which, those will have, you mentioned a larger battery. They'll probably have somewhere around a half kilowatt hour lithium ion battery in there.
And that's easier to do. That kind of capacity is easier to do at the higher voltage.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, just for reference, most strong hybrids, cars like the Prius and Ford Fusion and most other, high voltage hybrids are typically somewhere around 1.2 to 1.4 kilowatt hour batteries. So, this is about, a half, a little less than half the size of what you typically get in one of those. So, it'll give you some electric assist. It'll give you the ability to do more aggressive auto stop start on the engine. So instead of waiting till the car comes to a complete stop to shut off the engine, it'll shut down the engine at maybe 5 to 8 miles per hour. if you're decelerating, and then it'll launch you on electricity till you get going, rolling 2 or 3 miles an hour, and then start the engine. And what that does, in addition to saving fuel, it also because everything's already in motion, it actually, you get smoother starts and stops. So the stop-start functionality actually becomes a lot more transparent when you do it that way. So you don't feel the shuddering you get sometimes, when the car is standing still and, restarts, sometimes you get some shaking of the engine. You don't feel that as much when the car's already moving, and you're using some of the momentum of the car moving to help start the engine. So, it'll feel smoother. It'll get probably about 10 to 15% better fuel economy. And as you said, it'll probably, they've said that, at first, they'll have mild hybrids on both gas and diesel engines, but I think, probably by the early 2020s, as they get to the next generation of cars, they'll drop the diesel engines and just go with the gas only. And then also the plug-in hybrids that they have today on the XC90 and S90. So,
yeah, I mean, you had a take that you wrote up about this for Navigant Research as well. Mm-hmm. Any particular insight that we've missed here that you want to sort of add to the conversation?
Well, the thing that this strategy actually makes a lot of sense for Volvo, because unlike they're one of the smaller automakers. They sold a little over 500,000 cars last year, and they once they bring out the new 40 series, they will basically only have 2 vehicle platforms and 1 engine family across their entire lineup. They'll have multiple body styles on each one. So in the 90 series, you got the XC90 SUV, the S90 sedan, the V90 wagon. You'll have the 60 series, which is on that same scalable product architecture you mentioned. And then you'll have the 40 series on the smaller compact modular architecture, which that will also be shared with Geely's other new brand, Lynk & Co., that they're launching in Europe, which is focused on car sharing and mobility services. But for Volvo, at least, they've only got 2 vehicle platforms and 1 engine family. The gas and diesel engines are all part of 1 common engine family, and it's a set of 4-cylinder engines across all of these vehicles. At various power points, with naturally aspirated turbo and turbo plus supercharging. So, they really only have to do 1 design for a 48-volt system that they can basically apply to all these cars fairly easily. It's not like, for, say, for example, GM or Ford or Volkswagen, where they've got, still have, 8 or 9 different platforms and many different engine families. It's a lot easier for Volvo to manage this transition, especially in such a short time frame.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the points that I made, one of the thoughts that I had when I was writing it up when we initially had the announcement, was that not everybody else could do this, just because they're not a full line manufacturer. They're small enough that they can make that change, and it doesn't really, because their cars are on that small amount of architecture to begin with, it doesn't really hurt quite as much, and it quickly gets them through this. They're going to have that middle period. It gets them through that, and onto when they actually do have full electrification. I would not expect Volvo to be developing another internal combustion engine in the next few years.
Their current one is it's a fairly new design. It only launched a couple of years ago with the XC90. And you're right. They probably won't. They may never design a new internal combustion engine family.
Right.
By the time that this one has run its course, this current 2-liter 4-cylinder design, they may be fully electric at that point.
Right. And then they can just wind it down, which is a little bit sad because Swedish metallurgy has been just a glorious thing, and knowing how long Volvo 4-cylinder engines just stay in production.
Yeah.
They made their first 4-cylinder, it started off as like the B14, in the early 50s, and that took us all the way up. They finally put that out of production in like 98 when it was the B230. Yeah. And even their 5-cylinder stuff, and so that was a modular engine family. It was a 4, 5, and 6. Those have lasted quite a while as well. They've been around since the launch of the 850. So yeah, Volvo tends to engineer its engines for the long term. I don't anticipate that they have any plans to create a new engine family before they no longer need engines, and then they can put their energies and their fortunes into other areas of automaking, batteries and motors. So we may actually see the cars spike in cost a little bit. That was my other thought was, are we seeing Volvo pushing people toward more expensive cars by not giving them the, gas only option? But then I don't know, a mild hybrid doesn't strike me as something that's tremendously more expensive to. Yeah,
that's one of the advantages to the 48 volt systems is you can do a 48 volt mild hybrid for between $800 and $1,000 cost premium. So yes, it's not that much.
That's almost, that may be less expensive than diesel.
It is
with the after treatment system. So
yeah, it's about half the incremental cost of going from gas to diesel.
Right. So either they eat some of the cost and they keep it the same price as the gas only cars, or they increase the price a little bit. And if you were thinking about buying a diesel, the mild hybrid could be cheaper than diesel. That's all speculation. That's up in the air. Until
the thing to keep in mind, Volvo is a premium brand, and they are like most of the premium brands, they will have an easier time absorbing that cost. Their customers will be more likely to absorb that cost premium when they buy a car than somebody at a lower price point. Somebody who's spending $50,000-$60,000 on a car, is not going to flinch as much at adding an extra $800 to $1,000 to the price as someone who's buying a $20,000 car.
Right. I mean, it just adds a little bit to the payment. Well, whatever. Just throw it in. Throw in the floor mats.
The other thing too is, a lot of the other premium brands are going in the same direction, perhaps not as aggressively as Volvo is. But, for example, recently, the Oliver Blume, the CEO of Porsche, said he expects that half of Porsche's production will be electric by 2023.
Well, Michael Taylor, who also writes for Forbes, did a more thorough sort of evaluation of this. And one of the things he pointed out was that Volvo is definitely making good PR out of it. But they're not doing anything that their contemporaries at Mercedes or PSA or BMW aren't doing. All of the European automakers are pushing really hard to embrace electrification because there's regulations that go in place very soon, and they all want to get ahead of it.
Exactly. And, one other factor for Volvo pushing them in this direction is that they're also pushing really hard on automation, going towards automated driving. And those systems will require more electrical power, to power the compute platforms and the sensors and the actuators and everything else. So, for level 3 and 4 automated driving, especially level 4, you really need to have at a minimum 48 volt electrical systems in order to properly supply all of the hardware that you need for that capability.
So these are the numbers and the alphanumerics we're going to need to get familiar with going forward. You've got the levels of autonomous driving, right? Level 3, level 4, level 5. That's one thing to understand. The next thing to understand is the 48 volt electrical systems. That's something that's going to be more and more consistent. And then we've got the EU7 emissions targets, which is driving a lot of this. And that puts the CO2 emissions at 95 grams per kilometer. None of the European automakers think they can hit that without going to some sort of electrified solution. So those are really going to be some motivating factors where it used to be just sort of, fuel economy and horsepower and torque. Now we've got these things. We've got the systems to support. We've got the autonomous driving that is going to be a thing and at varying levels. So just understanding what they mean and then emissions targets. And I don't know what North American emissions targets are going to be. I think
no one knows.
Right. I mean, we've got them. Are they still tightening toward the 54 mile per gallon cafe target that had been?
Well, that's the plan, but keep in mind that a couple of months ago, shortly after taking office, the current administration decided that they were going to go back and revisit reopen the midterm review on the corporate average fuel economy standards. So at least through 2021, they're locked in, and in 2021 they have to be at I think about 42 miles per gallon or so. And then the 2022 through 2025 standards are what they were evaluating under the midterm review that was going on last year, and that was supposed to be a 2-year process. So that wasn't supposed to conclude until the end of this year, in 2017. But they decided that they had enough data, towards the end of last year, that they would go ahead and make the decision to just lock in the standards where they were. The new administration decided that they needed to go back and revisit that decision. And so beyond 2021, it's unclear right now what is going to happen here in the U.S.
That's an obfuscatory technique to say, well, we need more research. That is a delay tactic. It annoys me. I mean, we're not going to hit that 2021 number, right? Our cafe numbers are not. And nobody's up at 40 something.
Yeah, they'll hit those. They're already on track to hit those.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I thought corporate average fuel economy was nowhere near 40 something.
You got to keep in mind, what these numbers actually mean. So there's the numbers that are used for cafe, and then there's the numbers that show up on the label when you buy a new car, and those are two very different numbers. The way the cafe standards are calculated, they do. They use the same two original drive cycles, the FTP and I think US07 that they've been using since the early 1970s when they did the original. So the city and highway drive cycles that they started with in the 70s.
And they apply a correction factor?
Yeah, well, those continue to be used for the cafe numbers. So you have to keep incrementally improving on those two as part of cafe. So that number, that's where the 54, 40 plus miles per gallon up to 54 comes in. It's based on those two drive cycles. And, anybody who's, older than, 25 or 30 probably remembers, when the fuel economy numbers on new cars were wildly overstated.
Oh yeah.
And that was based on those numbers. Since 2008, they switched for the label values. They switched to a 5-cycle test. So you have those two original cycles plus 3 additional types of drive cycles. And so that gives significantly more realistic numbers. They're still not perfect, but they're a lot closer to what you can expect to get in the real world. And then there's additional factors that come in there, like they get credits for doing auto stop start and various other things. And those are the numbers. Those adjusted numbers are what goes on the fuel economy label that you see on the window sticker. And so there's usually about a 30% difference between that and the numbers that are used for the cafe calculations. So when we're at 40 miles per gallon cafe, the window sticker is going to be, closer to about 29 or 30. And 54 is going to be, in the 34 or 35 mile per gallon range.
Nonsense. All of it's nonsense. Let's talk about something else.
Okay. So let's talk about crashing stuff.
Yeah, crashing stuff. And if you're Tesla, you don't like it, your response is, hey, no, guys, we crash fine. You're the problem, which is what Tesla said to the IIHS.
Yeah. So
I'm completely glossing over the story, but that's my take on it.
Yeah. So the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, they do a bunch of crash tests and various other evaluations on new vehicles every year that go above and beyond what is mandated by federal motor vehicle safety standards. So the Department of Transportation, NHTSA, does their new car assessment program, and they get new vehicles and they test all the stuff that's mandated by law. So you have things like the 40 mile per hour barrier crash test and, various other tests, side impact test and the rear impact test, all those things that are mandated in the law, that, you can't sell a new vehicle unless you meet all those requirements. And, for the last several years, the Tesla Model S has, aced those easily. Gotten 5-star ratings on the NCAP, on the new car assessment program.
Right. There's people out there who think that it's like the safest car ever made.
Right. And, Tesla keeps reminding us that they're the safest car ever made because they get the highest scores on the NCAP.
Which is not the same thing as being the safest car ever made.
Well, the thing about any kind of standardized tests like this is that they never test every possible scenario.
Well, yeah, there's that, but yeah.
They test certain specific criteria. And, if you can do well on that, just like, standardized school testing, if you can do well on the test, you pass and you move on to the next grade.
Right. It's like the kid who got.
I mean, you know anything.
Right. And that's exactly what I was going to say. It's like, so back in my day, SATs topped out at 1600. And it's like acing all the tests is like getting a 1600 on your SAT, but you have no common sense. And the holy grail is the car that does both, that aces the tests and performs in real world situations. And I'm not saying that the Tesla doesn't have good crash protection and good performance in real life situations,
and they absolutely do. I mean, we've seen plenty of photos of Teslas that have been crashed, where people, in severe crashes where people have walked away. But it all depends on the kind of impact that you have.
Right.
It happens to be an impact that matches what was tested by DOT. You're golden. But if it's a slightly different kind of impact, the results can be dramatically different.
Well, and we saw this when they switched to the small overlap test. The cars that managed, like everybody flunked that except for, I think, just a couple. And the cars that did well were the cars that had a very careful, very deliberate safety design from the get-go. And they weren't even new designs. The Volvo XC90 was one of the few cars that passed the small overlap test, and I think got a good rating, or at least didn't flunk it when that test was introduced. So everybody was getting 5 stars, with the frontal crash ratings and side crash ratings. And they introduced this new test that's different, and all of a sudden you see which cars are designed to test well and which cars are actually designed to perform well. And those are two different things. And it seems like Tesla's having kind of a consistency problem.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, first of all, the small overlap test, for those not familiar with it, basically, what it is, instead of crashing the whole car straight into a wall, what they do in the small overlap test is you have 25% of the width of the car hits the barrier. So one quarter of the width from the outer edge of the car and hits a solid barrier at 40 miles an hour. And, that's totally, a totally realistic scenario. I mean, especially, if you're talking about cars, that are coming at each other on a divided or on an undivided road. One car drifts across the center line, you have a glancing blow on the other car. It's a totally realistic scenario. But the thing is, if the cars are designed only for the federal motor vehicle safety standards, what they typically have is if you look at the structure underneath the body panels, there's usually a couple of big long rails that run down the front, that support the bumper. And so all that energy goes through those frame rails and, gets dissipated through the structure of the car. But if you happen to hit just outside of that frame rail, which is a totally plausible scenario, and it's estimated that roughly a quarter of all crashes, are comparable to the small overlap test. And, I think something like 22% of all traffic fatalities, occupant fatalities, are in that type of crash. So that's a very realistic test. And so if you crash it just outside of those frame rails, what tends to happen is that whole structure on the outside and the front suspension and the wheel tends to get compressed, into the firewall. and often intrudes into the passenger compartment, into the driver's footwell, and can cause a lot of damage. And for Tesla, they've now tested the Model S twice on this test. Once they did it earlier this year as part of a group of EVs that they tested, and then they did it again more recently as part of a group of large sedans. And in both cases, the car didn't fail on the small overlap test, but when IIHS does their grades on these, the cars get either poor, acceptable, or good. Those are the three grades that they get. And the Model S only got an acceptable. It wasn't a poor, so it's still, you're not going to necessarily get killed in this type of crash, but it's not, it wasn't, it didn't reach the threshold for the best grade, and thus they didn't get a top safety pick from IIHS for that car.
Right, and Tesla's answer to that was not contrition.
No, not even remotely. In fact, their response to IIHS was, IIHS and dozens of other private industry groups around the world have methods and motivations that suit their own subjective purposes. Yes, they in fact do. And IIHS's purpose is to promote vehicle safety and minimize the chance of people getting killed in crashes. That's what they have always done. They're a nonprofit organization. It's funded by the insurance industry. And, what they do is research on automotive safety, and, they do all kinds of testing, to evaluate cars, to do independent testing. And, besides crash tests, they also test things like headlights and the automatic emergency braking system. So they're starting to get into testing ADAS systems. So, they do a lot of good work, and a lot of the research that they have done over the years has fed into upgrading the federal regulations. So, things like the roof crush standards and, some of the other deformable barrier tests that are now part of, federal regulations, things like that, came out of work that was done by organizations like IIHS.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it all, honestly, it traces back to what Ralph Nader had done.
Yeah.
And even before that, it was the armed forces. I believe it was the Army who noticed they lost more soldiers to car accidents around bases than they
combat.
Yeah. And so they said, hey, what's up here? And so again, it's, Ralph Nader was an actuary in the insurance industry, and in the insurance industry is the ones who have to pay when somebody is hurt, or there's just a loss on the property, whether or not anybody's hurt. So their motivation is to really see how these cars actually perform, and how they protect the occupants, because it's very expensive for them to have to pay people for getting hurt or killed in car accidents. So that's their interest, and I understand there's a business side to it.
Yeah, I mean, and they obviously have a business interest, but as a side benefit of that is that it also helps prevent, or helps fewer people get killed in car crashes.
Yeah.
And, typically what has happened in the past, if, when they introduce a new test, or, they test a new vehicle, if the vehicle doesn't do well, the car makers usually acknowledge that. They say, okay, we will go back and take a look at that. And they often come back, a year or sometimes less than that, a year or two later, with an upgraded model, and they go back and retest it and, hopefully get better results. And car makers like to promote the safety of their vehicles. And, when they do get these top safety picks from IIHS, they promote that in their marketing. So, they have an incentive, to try and make these vehicles as safe as possible. And an example, just a couple of years ago on this small offset test, when Ford launched the aluminum F-150, they had slightly different front structures on the crew cab and the regular and extended cab versions. And the crew cab actually did better on the small offset test. And that was actually what IIHS initially tested. It got a good rating on that one. But when they went back later and tested the other models, they found that they didn't do as well because there was a different structure there. And, within a few months after that test, Ford introduced a running change on all the other F-150s, and they upgraded the structure on those. So instead of complaining about what IIHS did, they went and made the vehicles better. So
Yeah.
instead of Tesla whining about, IIHS's motives, they should just say, okay, we're going to go back and reevaluate this and make this better.
But, Tesla's probably one of the very few, if not the only automakers that can get away with this kind of reaction as well. A lot of their owners and fans will be willing to give them a pass and to make excuses for something that honestly, being inconsistent and also just not sort of wanting to make the cars as safe as they can be or as safe as they're supposed to be. Like that's not okay.
Yeah.
It's like I struggle to find better words than that for it, but it's just like that's not something you want to push back on. Like that, it helps you to build the car the way it was designed anyway. Like it's been designed to pass that test. So why is it not passing it? There's an issue there. That's something that you want to go back. GM and Ford and Volkswagen, they couldn't sit there and say, well, no, the problem is you guys, your agenda. You guys suck.
Yeah.
That's,
in the past, manufacturers have complained about some of the tests that IIHS has done, but ultimately, they ended up going back and changing their designs to make them perform better in those tests because they realized that people actually, these were credible tests and they were done professionally and, people gave the results credence. So, there's an incentive to make vehicles better.
Yeah, but and that's the thing. Like Tesla doesn't.
And unfortunately, in this case, it isn't something that Tesla can fix with an over-the-air software update.
Right. That's it's very easy. But that's the part that we were talking about the Bolt. Like that's the part that the old line automakers do really well. Is they do the structural engineering and the assembly and the all of that stuff. It's very sophisticated and it's very complex and it's hard and it's hard to do it consistently. And the companies that everybody loves to hate are really good at it, and it shows. Tesla doesn't even need marketing. They don't even put their cars in the press fleets, really. So again, like they can probably get away with it at least for a while, but they're introducing a car that people are going to expect behaves just like, your run of the mill Camry. And that's going to be a real test for them. And I don't think those buyers, I don't think Model 3 buyers are going to make the same excuses or give them as much of a pass on stuff. They're going to be shocked and surprised and upset when the car and the automaker lets them down on something that they had assumed was exceptional with this brand that has an exceptional image. And I don't need to babble about that anymore.
Okay.
So...
Let's return back to the topic of electrification and crossovers. Interestingly, this year, both Hyundai Motor Group mainstream brands, Kia and Hyundai, have introduced new vehicles based on the same platform, but they are very different looking vehicles. Hyundai designed a platform specifically for electrified vehicles that is available as a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, and a full battery electric model. And for Hyundai, they opted to put a 5-door hatchback body style on it that bears a striking resemblance in its profile to the Toyota Prius, and that vehicle is on sale now as both a BEV and a hybrid. The plug-in hybrid's coming this fall. But their sibling brand over at Kia, instead of that 5-door, sloping 5-door hatchback design, the car design, like the Prius-like design, they opted to go with a crossover body style on the same platform. And mechanically, the two cars are identical. The only difference is the body style. And interestingly, since they went on sale earlier this year, the Kia Niro is outselling the Hyundai Ioniq almost 3-1.
Yeah, they've sold almost 13,000 Niros, probably by now 13,000 Niros, and just under 5,000 Ioniqs. So my first thought was like, well, didn't the Niro go on sale first? And it turns out they both went on sale in February, which points out to me that maybe Kia is doing a better job of telling people about the Niro. I had somebody ask me about the Niro.
I mean, that may be part of it. And it may also be a factor of, people, American consumers just have a preference for crossovers right now.
And that's so maybe it's both of those things together. It's an interesting point, especially since I think I'm correct in saying the Ioniq gets better fuel economy than the Niro.
It does by about 6 or 7 miles per gallon, because it is lower, has a smaller frontal area, less drag. But even the Niro, let's see, and it's the most fuel efficient variant of it is rated at 52 city, 49 highway, and 50 miles per gallon combined.
Right.
So, for a compact crossover to get 50 miles per gallon.
It's very good.
I don't think too many people are going to complain about that.
Right. But you could get almost 60, right? 55, 56 with the Ioniq. So you're seeing that the Niro is very good to the point of definitely good enough for most people. And
truthfully, the difference in terms of how much you actually spend on fuel, once you get past about 35 miles per gallon, the difference between 50 and 60 is almost negligible in terms of how much fuel you're actually going to save.
But it's very expensive to get from 50 to 60 in terms of engineering and the actual car itself. But I do think you're right. I think the Niro is the product that's shaped like people want. Right now, it's packaging, and it's. I prefer it just because I think it looks cool, and I've seen them out in the street. Like I don't mind the Ioniq, but it reminds me of a Prius, and not that I hate the Prius, but I don't know. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. Just say like the Niro is it's different enough. It's neat. It's intriguing.
Yeah, it is, and it'll be interesting to watch. As they. Towards the end of the year and into the beginning of next year, as they launch the plug-in hybrid and then the battery electric version of this to see how it does, because, especially the battery electric, assuming they use the same battery pack that's in the battery version of the Ioniq, that'll be, about 124 mile range. It's a 28 kilowatt hour pack. That'll be the first electric crossover with that kind of range.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
more of a true crossover, not like the Bolt.
Yeah, and I think that they made a really solid play to say, we're gonna go in this. They found a little bit of space, right? A little bit of like greenfield space that nobody had a crossover that was this efficient. And so they went for it, and it seems to be paying off. And their goal is actually relatively modest. They just want to sell 36,000 of them per year, or this year. That I don't know that they're going to have a problem doing that. I mean, let's see. They've been on sale since February. Oh yeah, they're probably not going to get there. Well, like they might get to 30
as they launch the plug-in version. They'll probably hit 30. I wouldn't be surprised if they hit 30. Because they probably had limited availability, in the first couple of months. As they ramp up and have more vehicles available, they'll probably sell more. So they may well hit their target.
You think they'll hit 36?
I wouldn't rule it out yet.
That's ambitious. I mean, the other thing too is Kia overall outselling Hyundai now? I think they are.
Don't think so. Not yet. See, so far, year to date, 2017, they're actually down a bit because they're still kind of car heavy. So they're at 296,000 for the year, and Hyundai total is where's the total? Here we go, 336,000. So yeah, Hyundai is still a little bit ahead. They're ahead by about 40,000 units compared to Kia. And then another 10,000 if you add in Genesis.
Wow, they sell that many Genesis.
Yeah, so far 10,000 this year.
Genesis. Anyway, Genesee. Genesee's that beer from here. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, the Niro, I haven't gotten one in the fleet yet. Have you had a chance to drive one?
I've not driven the Niro. I drove the
Ioniq.
The Ioniq a couple months ago on a local drive here, and I've actually got an Ioniq hybrid coming next week, and I've got a Niro scheduled in August.
I'd be curious to see how that drives. Somebody actually did ask me about it, and I was surprised that he saw it in the dealership. He went in, he's got an Optima, and he was like, "Hey, what do you think about the Niro?" I was like, "Wow, what do you know about the Niro?" I had just written it up for something. So they got it out into market, and it's getting noticed. So, the rest of this year and next year will be telling to see what that does.
Yep.
All right, let's wrap up with one more topic: the Hespen Rally.
Yeah. So the Patrick Hespen was a former automotive PR guy here in the Detroit area. He was I first met him when he was at Ford, and he spent some time at Audi, and he finished up his career at Chrysler before, unfortunately, succumbing to cancer way too young a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so he was well loved and respected member of the automotive community here in the Detroit area. And so let's see, in 2015, his widow and a bunch of his friends organized the first Hespen Rally, and we drove from here in Birmingham, Michigan to Cleveland, his hometown, in a bunch of cars, and had lunch down there and raised about $4,000, I think, for the what is it? I can never remember the name of this. It's the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. Basically, it's a very rare form of bile duct cancer. And so we raised a bunch of money for that, and they're doing another Hespen Rally coming up on August 6th. So if you're in the Southeast Michigan area and you're interested in hanging out with a bunch of journalists and automotive PR people and friends of Patrick, and just seeing some cool cars, and you want to drive with us, feel free to join us. You can go to hespenrally.com and register, and all they ask is that you make a donation of at least $50 to the foundation, and then you're free to join us for a road rally that starts at Pasteiner's AutoZone Hobbies in Birmingham and ends up at Belle Isle in Detroit, and we'll have a meandering route to get there. We won't just be running down Woodward Avenue. So look forward to meeting you if I'll be there. With
you're gonna have the Miata, yeah.
We'll have the Miata there.
Excellent.
So come on out and join us and help us raise some money.
Yeah, he was young. He's younger than me.
Yeah, he was only 37.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. So he was very well loved and respected in this area.
Well, yeah, definitely get out there and are you gonna be solo, or are you gonna have the dog in the car, or
either the dog or my wife. I'm not sure. We'll see if she wants to.
So you can't give ride-alongs. That's what I was gonna say. You can't. We should auction that off. We should be like one lucky
ride along in my Miata.
Yeah, the person who writes the biggest check to the charity gets to ride along with you in the Miata.
There we go.
I think that's it's philanthropy.
Rosie wouldn't mind that.
Yeah. All right. We touched on a couple of questions earlier. Do we have any others?
Let's see. We talked about the stitching on the CX-9. We did have something else.
There was one Facebook.
Polestar. Somebody asked any thoughts about the announced plans for Polestar. Mentioned that very briefly, but
yeah. I mean, I think that they're like the Skunk Works, and going full electric is going to give them the performance that they've been known for. So I'm not sure how they feel about that change, but I'm sure they're glad they still have jobs. So
yeah,
and you still got to make the car ride and handle. So,
that's right, regardless of what kind of propulsion system you've got.
Yeah.
And then Brooke asked that we make sure that we mention which engine size and horsepower are in the cars we test. And I think I
hope we did that this week. If not, we'll...
CX-9 has a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder turbo with 310 horsepower, I think.
310 pound-feet of torque.
Oh, okay.
280 something horsepower.
Yeah. And the Bolt is a 200 horsepower electric motor, and you got a 2.5 boxer, naturally aspirated boxer in the Impreza.
Yes. Is it 2.5 or it might be the 2? I forget. It's one of the FAs, one of the new flat fours, which I say new because it's, in the last 5 years. It's been new. It might be the 2.5.
So let's see.
I think it is.
Facebook, I think that's about it. There might have been something that came in by email. Let's see. Oh no, we talked about that. That's from last week. So yeah, I think we're about done.
All right. I did see some more reviews. I at least saw one on Facebook. So thank you for that. Again, throw us some iTunes reviews. That helps us show up for other people who are looking for good podcasts. And I know that we're a little bit different from all the other automotive podcasts, which I hope works in our favor and makes it interesting to listen to. But yeah, please throw us some reviews. Feel free to give us some feedback and ask us to clarify any points we may have glossed over, such as assuming everybody knows the engines we're talking about all the time in cars, that they can just...
We would never gloss over anything.
Right, like Karnak. So, yeah, please let us know what's on your mind, and we'll address it next time.
All right, and we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say, ahoy, or land ho, and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.